What's going on, writers? My name is Michael James. I'm a published author and full-time writer, and today we are diving back into my notebook to look at the notes that I have written in the past month on The Writer's Journey by Christopher Vogler. So this is super exciting. I've been enjoying doing this, and hopefully you'll learn something. So grab yourself a coffee and make sure you're wearing a cozy grandpa sweater, because you always got to be wearing these if you want to be a good writer. So let's get right into it. So as always, if you haven't seen the previous videos, they would be beneficial to watch before this one, just because all of these notes go chapter by chapter as I read through the book. And so if you go through the first two videos in this series, then it'll just help with understanding what is to come next. So we left off with the approach to the inmost cave, and now we are at the ordeal, which is, you're approaching it, now you're at it. So that's where we are at. And I think we got like 13 pages to go through, a few cool charts to see. And as always, I'll put the pictures on the screen. And let's get right into it. So, page 155 is where we pick up. The ordeal. Deepest chamber of the inmost cave. Greatest challenge. Most fearsome opponent. Heart of the matter. No matter what you come for, it's death that now stares back at you. Usually, the reader views the hero as cheating death, literally, emotionally, spiritually, symbolically, in some way. It's actually a really good point, because usually in the ordeal or the one of the main crises in your story, there is a part where it's a life or death scenario, and sometimes it's not death physically. It is death, spiritually, emotionally, or sometimes it's somebody, like a relationship dying, a friend dies, whether it's physically or spiritually, emotionally, whatever. So I just want to say that because sometimes it's cliche just to have your character look like they died. I mean, like, some movies make it work. Like, if you look at the Harry Potter series, like, there are a few times where it looks like Harry dies or one of his friends dies, but sometimes it is just as strong to show a death through a relationship, or a death symbolically in some sort of way, or they lose something that is dear to them, and that is some form of death that they are dealing with or fighting against. The hero must die and be reborn, for that is the test of a true hero. Death changes a person. The ordeal shouldn't be confused with the climax. Ordeal is the big event of Act 2, while the climax is the big event of Act 3. And I actually like how the writer points this out, because especially in my own books, when I'm writing a story, there's usually some kind of physical climax somewhere halfway through the story where it is a large obstacle to overcome, but then there is more of an emotional climax towards the end of the story where there still may be physical elements, but it is more about the emotions and their resurrection, and them being reborn, a new person that can overcome the obstacles that they may have not been able to face at the beginning of the story. So I like how he points that out, because a lot of movies do that. A great example of this is, I always use Shrek, but gotta use it. If you look at Shrek, there's a very big physical obstacle he overcomes, which is the dragon. And then at the very end is the actual emotional climax, where it looks like all hope is lost when the guards grab him and Lord Farquaad puts the crown on and he says they're married and everything looks bad, and then the dragon eats him. So that is another climactic point, but that's considered the actual climax of the story, whereas it's more of a physical crisis early on when he fights the dragon. The ordeal is the central crisis, the point in a story or drama at which hostile forces are in the tensest state of opposition. Like an illness, it is the high spike of fever, after which the person begins to recover or get worse. Sometimes things have to get worse before they can get better. A common pattern to follow has the ordeal or crisis happening at the midpoint of the story. So I have a little diagram right here, cute little picture. I probably took it right from the book, but you got Act 1, and then Act 2A, and then the midpoint, and then Act 2B, and then Act 3, and then the denouement. I think I'm pronouncing that right, denouement, which is just another word for conclusion or ending. And then the vertical lines represent high points in the story. This structure allows for a second critical moment at the end of Act 2. And then there's another one here, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and then the denouement. So no Act 2, A or B. And this one, there's no central ordeal. Instead, there's a long build-up to a delayed crisis. And actually, this second picture here is more of what more shorter stories would go for, just because they may not make the space for there to be two large crises in the story, with one being the crisis, one being the climax. It might just be one big one that it's building up to. I feel like a lot of mysteries might have something like this. Like if there's not a lot of chase scenes and it's just trying to put all the pieces together and then a big explosion at the end where the mystery is solved. I know that when I wrote my first two books, this is how I wrote them. It was Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and then denouement instead of 2A and 2B with the Midpoint Crisis. But this structure allows for a slower build-up to a major crisis at the end of Act 2. Act 2 is the longest of the three acts, which is pretty obvious because Act 1 is introductory. It's where you're building up the background and the normal life, and then Act 2 is where the adventure begins. Everything changes, and you throw your hero on this adventure, on this quest, and there's a lot of character development that has to be done. There's a lot of training that has to be done. They have to overcome obstacles. They have to meet allies. There's a lot going on there that gives you reason to understand that Act 2 is going to be the largest portion of the story. Everything in a story is built around one central crisis, the ordeal. For example, reaching the top of the mountain, the depths of a cave, the heart of the forest. Everything builds up to this point, and everything after is just going home. The crisis shows readers and heroes they have reached the midpoint. Sometimes the ordeal is not the most exciting scene, but it is central to the story to have a bottom or peak. And again, if I use Shrek as an example, when you see Shrek overcome, like saving the princess from the dragon, you would maybe expect, if this is the first time you're watching that movie, you might expect that to be happening at the end. But then you're like, oh, there's more to the story, and the more of the story is going home and traveling home back with her. Crisis, critic, and critical come from the Greek word krisi, meaning to separate. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but you can correct me if you know Greek better than I do. After crossing this zone, the hero is literally or metaphorically reborn, and nothing is the same. Sometimes it is good to have someone witness the hero's death. So an example of this would be C-3PO and R2-D2 listening on the intercom as their friends appear to be getting crushed by the trash compactor. I actually love that scene in A New Hope. It shows that the robots, or the droids, whatever you want to call them, in the Star Wars world have emotions, because C-3PO is like freaking out while R2-D2 is trying to solve the issue for them before they die. So I really like that scene. We all relish a little taste of death now and then. Love that quote. I think I loved that quote so much that I posted it on Facebook. Relieve grieve with a sudden explosion of joy. A story should heighten readers' emotions. This is actually so important. You want to contrast your story with moments where they drop to their lowest point and then they immediately seek help, or someone comes to their aid and there's blossoming joy from them being picked back up. And I do this in my own story I'm working on right now. A lot of the story is centered around trauma, and every time a trauma strikes, the main character runs back to this other character and they're like, please help me, like I can't do this alone, like I'm hopeless without you. And you see this beautiful scene where they come back together. The ordeal is usually one of the deepest depressions in a story. Therefore, it should result in one of the highest emotional peaks. Some stories have someone else die or the hero kills someone. In these scenarios, the hero often still feels as if it was their own death, especially if it is someone close to them. Another important point, because you don't want death to be played off as a normality in your story, especially if your main character's never been on some kind of quest or anything and then someone dies. Like, that's a big deal to live your first death and see it right in front of you, especially if you're the one taking that death or taking that life from someone. It's a big deal, so make sure you play it up as a big deal and there's respect to death in a sense. In many cases, though it is external forces causing the experience of death, it is the hero's own shadow that they struggle with most. It acts as a negative confrontation to the hero. So, the shadow of the hero or the ghost of the hero, the thing that haunts them in the past. An example of this is like, Batman's parents were murdered, and that's like his ghost of his past. He's always thinking about that. There's times in the story where, if you watch the movie, there's flashbacks to that moment, or he's, you can tell that he's thinking about that, or he talks about it at a low point. Generally, the shadow mask represents the unlikable traits and qualities of the hero. In our own lives, we try to project these traits onto others. This is called demonizing. This is such an interesting point. I think of like, a lot of times when someone's caught out, they did something wrong, or maybe, whether they did something wrong or they're caught in a fib or whatever it is, whatever the case may be, a lot of times they try to point the finger at someone else and blame someone else. And a lot of times the things that they're blaming the other person for are things that they struggle with inside, which is very interesting. Like whether it's jealousy or, you did this and that, or whatever it is. It's a very interesting point that he brings up. During an emotional crisis, people like to project all their problems onto another person or group, which makes them the symbol of everything the projector hates and fears. For example, the devil is a shadow of God. Again, this just goes back to what I was just saying, like everything that someone loves in life, or the qualities that they try to represent in themselves, the things that they don't like to represent, the things that they don't live for, you will see that in other characters, whether they are actually projecting it themselves or they actually live out the opposite life. Either way, you see that contrast, and the main character hates them for that. Especially like if you look at a movie like Star Wars, there's the light side and the dark side. Villains can act as the hero's shadow, a dark, distorted reflection of their beliefs. In most cases, the main villain escapes during Act 2 until a final showdown in Act 3. Villains and shadows don't usually see themselves as evil. In their mind, they are the hero of their own story. A dark moment for the hero is a bright one for the shadow. Which is very interesting, because if you look at other characters in your story if you look at it from their point of view, think of them as the hero of their own story, and having some ups and downs as well, it will make the story a little more balanced. It'll make that person have a little more emotion, because you don't want them to just be evil for the sake of evil. They should be evil because of something going on, and they should think that what they're doing is actually good. Good exercise. Walk through a story from new point of views. I should try that. That's interesting. The ordeal should be where the hero is expected to die. The difference between life and death often comes down to gifts from the mentor previously in the story. Luke's lightsaber, for example. That's really interesting. I try to use the gifts in my own story more, and I don't seem to use them as much as I should. And I try to think about how I can use those better. Even if those gifts are more like attributes, like the mentor taught someone to live a certain way, or taught them not to mess with these types of people. Those are traits about them that they should learn to hold on to when the going gets tough. In a romance, the ordeal is an emotional crisis. It could be a moment of great intimacy, where the hero defenses are slowly dying, or the opposite, where the love seems to die instead. Every archetype has both a bright, positive side and a dark, negative side. Most common is shapeshifting. Some stories confront the anima or the animus. Back on page 60, the anima is the female's unconscious positives and negatives of a man, and the animus is the male's unconscious positives and negatives of a woman. These projections are then seen in how a character views the opposite sex and what expectations they have of them. This can happen if the hero is attracted to someone who isn't good for them, or a more foreign part of a character is revealed and takes control. An example is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Another example is Reba discovering that Dollarhide, a quiet but kind man, was actually the Red Dragon. If a hero does die in the ordeal, the audience quickly looks for a new character to connect with and root for. Very difficult to pull off. This is important as well, because there's a lot of people that want to have a story where they kill off one of their main characters. And one of the things you have to understand, when you are storytelling, you are putting your reader into the mind and into the shoes of your main character. Even if you have multiple main characters, they are following those main characters on their quest. And if you kill one of them off and the scene continues, your reader is going to be like, who am I in the story? Where do I go? It's almost like they're this soul that has left its body, and they're like, what body do I go back to? Now I'm dead, and now I can't figure out what to do in this scene. So make sure that if you are going to kill off a main character, you make it clear to your reader who to reconnect with, who to follow next. There are some stories, I think the old movie Psycho with Norman Bates in it, the main character in that story is killed off. I haven't watched that movie myself, but I think this book talked about it and talked about how in that movie the main character dies off halfway through and you're following a new character, but the writer does a very good job of directing the reader or the viewer to follow the right character next. So you have to make sure you do that, or your reader's going to feel lost in your story. Page 170. The ordeal can be defined as the moment the hero faces his greatest fear. Yeah, I think that's a good point to make, because it builds a lot more intensity when it's close to heart. The ordeal is often where the death of the ego takes place. The old man passes away and a new man is born. It is the taste of death that gives the hero a new perspective, sometimes almost transcendent. I like that point a lot. The ordeal is where a main character wins the right to be called hero. I love that, because if your main character does not overcome some form of death, then are they truly a hero? You know, all the stories and movies you watch, there's some form of death, whether it's the death of relations, the death of emotions, the death of, is it symbolic, is it spiritual, is it physical? You know, your main character is overcoming some form of death and becoming a new person. And if that's not happening, then are they even a hero? Are they even on a quest? Are they even overcoming anything? You know, if you look at The Hobbit and look at Bilbo Baggins on this adventure with all these dwarves are not afraid of anything, and they want their home back, and they're fighting for it. But if you look at Bilbo, he's fearful. He's never gone on an adventure. This is so unlike him, so against his character and his traits that he's a hobbit. He used to live in a hill in the ground and that's all he did. He's never gone outside of there. So for him to go on this quest, he has to face his fear a lot, and he has to face uncomfortability a lot. But as the story goes on, you see that he plays a larger role and builds that confidence, and he dies to the self of fear and becomes an adventurer like these dwarves. After facing death, the hero is at first respectfully stunned, but then becomes elated due to being alive. They are then ready to move on to the reward. And this kind of goes back to what I was saying, how there needs to be some kind of respect towards death. You need to point out to your reader, whether that's through the narrative or through showing how your main character reacts, there needs to be something that points out to your reader that they have some kind of respect or honor for death, and they know that it's taken place. Even if it's a symbolic death, your main character should know what has happened. They should know that they made the decision to overcome and conquer the death of fear, or whatever it is. After the ordeal, heroes relish in the reward, savoring the moment. We came, we saw, we kicked its ass. That's from Ghostbusters. I love that. It's natural for a hero to celebrate after facing death. Sometimes a campfire type scene is fitting after the ordeal, where heroes relish in their victory, joke and boast about overcoming death. Sometimes share moral codes they live by. I love this because it makes me think of in the Bible when Jesus rose from the grave and has resurrected. One of the next scenes that you see is him sitting around a fire eating fish with his disciples, and it's just like, man, what a moment. This guy just resurrected from the dead, and now he's sitting around a campfire enjoying some fish with you. Like, what a moment. Campfire scenes also help both heroes and the audience catch their breath after the action. It's a good chance to build more intimacy between your characters. The love scene also often comes after a great ordeal, as it shows the hero has made the sacrifice, now deserving or being rewarded with love. Remember, your hero must reap their reward. They did not go through an ordeal for nothing. It's the great exchange of sacrifice and life for something the hero seeks. The reward can also be called seizing the sword, as some heroes take or steal what they want after an ordeal. For example, taking the treasure after defeating a dragon. And this is another thing you see in The Hobbit. After facing death, the hero is a new creature and goes through initiation of a new beginning in a new rank. Sometimes surviving death leads to heroes gaining new abilities or perceptions. Seizing the sword can also be a moment of clarity, seeing through the deceptions of a shape-shifting ally. Clairvoyance is a common trope for heroes or mentors that have faced death. Sometimes there is a self-actualization moment after facing death. Just like when young men return from war, others around them might realize a change in the hero. Some heroes may abuse their new status with arrogance or cockiness, like a cop that cruelly treats a criminal. Sometimes in stories, once someone reaches victory, whether it's an ally or the main character, sometimes they're super cocky about it and it bites them in the butt afterwards. After seizing the sword and fully experiencing the reward, heroes are ready to get back to their quest, the road back. After experiencing the ordeal, the hero is faced with the choice of staying in the special world or returning home. Most return home or go to a totally new local ultimate destination, which I also really like this point because a lot of times main characters get to where they need to go and they conquer what they need to conquer, and then they realize like they need to go home. They need to share the news with others, or they need to bring back what they were seeking in the first place, or sometimes they find a new destination to stay, but a lot of times you see them go back home. This stage emphasizes the resolve of the hero, going home to implement lessons learned, which is kind of what I just said. And then I got a diagram here and I love this. So in the ordinary world, so this is like a clock, you see, except the 12 and this is kind of like a clock, but the numbers are back one, but 1 is where it starts, the ordinary world, and then 2 is, the call to adventure. Number 3 is the refusal of the call. Number 4 is meeting the mentor. Number 5 is crossing the first threshold, which is where you embark from the ordinary world to the special world. Number 6 is tests, allies, enemies. 7, the approach to the inmost cave. 8 is the ordeal. 9 is reward, seizing the sword. 10 is the road back. So now we're leaving the special world, going back into the ordinary world. And then what's coming is the resurrection and return with the elixir. So right now we're at the road back. That's what we're kind of studying right now. The road back is where heroes rededicate to the adventure. Sometimes heroes will need a wake-up call, something that pries them from the comfort of the reward. The road back is another threshold crossing from Act 2 and Act 3. So sometimes a wake-up call might be something like bad happening. Maybe they defeated their enemy, but the enemy escaped, and now the enemy is coming back to kidnap someone or hurt them in some way or chase them. There's a chase scene maybe back from the special world into the ordinary world, whatever it may be. Sometimes you need a wake-up call like, no, the adventure's still on. We gotta think fast. We gotta get back into the zone, get back in the rhythm, party time's over. During the road back, sometimes a villain makes a final effort to counterstrike the hero. Like an addiction that comes back to haunt its prey, unkilled or bigger boss villains may come to make a final effort to stop the hero. Another option is that in the big ordeal, big crisis, maybe the bad guy that is defeated was not actually the ultimate boss. It was one of his underlings, one of his main men, and now there needs to be a bigger boss fight that is to come. Many times a hero leaves the special world because they are running for their lives. Chase scenes are popular during the road back because it helps build momentum towards the finish. During chase scenes, the hero may throw something down or leave something behind as a sacrifice or to help get away. Heroes often do this in movies to show what really matters to them has changed. So an example would be like throws money aside to save a life, throws a victory away to help someone else. I forget what the movie I just watched with Tom Holland in it. There's a scene where the guy he's working with has the option of saving Tom Holland or keeping the gold. And he's like, all right, I think it's Mark Wahlberg acting with him. I forget. But he drops the gold and helps Tom Holland out. They escape, obviously, but yeah, that's what this makes me think of. Sometimes, instead of a chase scene, a villain escapes and goes on a rampage. So Hannibal Lecter does this. King Kong is a great example of this. Some stories have a final catastrophe moment, a delayed crisis that adds suspense during the road back. So those are all the notes I took in March. So we basically focused on the reward, the road back, and the ordeal. So that only leaves 2 sections left, which we will go over for all the notes that I write in the month of April. So I hope you guys enjoy these videos as much as I do. This is more of like a refresher course for me, because obviously I wrote all these, but rereading them and going back is so helpful. So I really highly recommend that if you want to be a better writer and you want to learn from other writers, pick up a book like The Writer's Journey. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to check it out and support me, because it is an affiliate link. But The Writer's Journey, incredible book about writing, and read a few pages a day and write notes on it. And at the end of the month, just like me, go back and reread your notes and see what you learned, because it's going to keep refreshing it in your mind, and it's going to start making more and more sense as you do it. And you know, a lot of this stuff, I know it all. I know most of this stuff already, but it is so good to keep refreshing myself and stay in the rhythm, stay at pace with learning while I'm studying and refreshing my mind while I'm writing. So yeah, this is really beneficial to me. It also makes me more creative when I'm writing my story, so I would highly recommend it. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoy these videos. Please leave a comment below if you want to add anything to this. Maybe you thought of a story that's a great example of one of the points we went over. I would love to hear it. And yeah, I really enjoy doing these videos. Leave a like if you like watching these videos, and subscribe if you want to see more. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.